Hey everybody, welcome to That Voiceover Podcast. I'm Stephen Cox. Now, you may or may not know this about the show, but our interviews are generally edited. Not heavily. We edit them for time. We try to make them concise. And, well, quite frankly, we edit them to try to make us sound like we know how to conduct an interview. But this week's interview is with Pat Fraley, who, in addition to working in animation for over 35 years and creating voices for over an astounding 4,000 characters, is also one of the best teachers in the business. You'll see what I'm talking about later on in the program. But the bottom line is he's kind of a one-man show. So I decided not to edit this one much and just kind of let it run as we recorded it. So hope you enjoy it. Pat Fraley, welcome to That Voiceover Podcast.
Well, thank you very much. I'm pleased to be here.
Now, you started in animation in...
I'll let you know now. I'm out by the pool. I'm in my bunkhouse.
Okay.
Got my cockatoo Bella with me because she'll scream if she's in the house alone.
Now, this is true. You really have your bird with you? That's what we heard in the background there?
Yeah, hold on. Brittany, Heather, put your tops back on. You know Mr. Fraley doesn't like you swimming without your tops on. Okay. We're all set now.
Now, for a second, it sounded like you said Mr. Fraley, and I thought that would have been a great Three's Company callback.
Mr. Fraley. Yeah, I just did a job this morning where I was playing a goldfish, and someone at the stage says, "All right, everybody clap your hands," and the line I had was, "Well, how are we going to do that?" I did about 15 ways, and somebody that knows me from the old days says, "Do it like Paul Lynde." So I went, "How are we going to do that? If I could, I'd be in Cirque du Soleil."
You have created over 4,000 characters in animation. That's just an astounding number. Did you think when you started out in 1979 you had that many characters in you?
Well, I started really in 74 being paid and really started doing TV. You're right, because I started animation in this country. I started in Australia doing voiceover, but when I got here, I didn't think of it. Actually, when I got here, I had a huge list of characters, and as the years went by, they dropped off. They weren't as good as other people's. You get in the big league, and all of a sudden you hear somebody that's like so much better. I was embarrassed. But I never really looked at it as the amount of characters. It was always a matter of adjusting and adapting characters that existed to fulfill other roles. If I did a mall guard and they wanted a Swedish ghost, here's your Swedish ghost. So it was much more like, and this is what I modeled after working for a while with Mel Blanc and Dawes Butler and June Foray and some of the first generation voiceover artists. They really were quite facile at managing a few characters and manipulating them to sound like others.
Right.
So I guess to answer your question, no, I didn't. I didn't realize how facile you can get at adapting and adjusting characters to fulfill roles in other projects.
Right, so you're talking about variations on themes, basically. And let's talk about a few specifics, because you were the voice of Krang on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Casey Jones and like 7 other characters. You were the voice of Ace on G.I. Joe. And then, of course, if you look on your IMDb listing, it's like a mile long. But you're saying essentially that you have essentially the way that a painter has certain colors they start with, and then you add and mix different right. Hues and textures. Is that how you kind of go about creating an original character then?
That's a wonderful metaphor, because it's like I have a palette. And maybe my palette has 24 characters, not like Valakwe, who apparently had 86. He had one of the richest palettes of all of the classical artists. But I had several. First, I defined the colors. That's like breaking down the 6 elements of a character voice. I broke them apart, and so they weren't compounds. They weren't mixed colors. They were primary colors.
Right. And what are those primary colors? Can you put that into words?
Sure. Going from our artist metaphor to voiceover, there are 6 elements to a character voice. There's pitch characteristic, tempo, rhythm, placement, and mouth work. And these are elements. They're not compounds.
Okay.
For example, if I ask you, do this for me. Give me a gravelly voice.
Okay, so you start with something like that, say.
Yeah, now why did you go low with it in pitch?
That was probably just instinctive, because when you think of a gravelly type voice, in my mind I thought of like a Harley Davidson biker, and I thought, well, you'd probably have a low voice if you had a gravelly voice, or like a Sam Elliott kind of character.
Yeah, so what you've created because of your instinct is a compound, a low voice with a gravelly pitch characteristic.
Interesting.
Now give me a gravelly pitch characteristic with a high pitch.
Okay, so then you're talking something like this.
Yeah.
Which sounds a little bit like Marge Simpson's sisters as it's coming out of me.
Yeah, well, you've broken up a compound into an element, and you can see as you do those with the various 6 elements, and we break down our notions, we get much more versatile.
And then you can add accents and things like that.
Oh,
and then,
sure.
Sure.
Yeah, you could be a Frenchman with a high pitch characteristic, or you could be a Russian with a low pitch characteristic. And the Katie bar the door. It's a math deal, so I can't help. But can you imagine with your 6 elements and the various ways you can combine them? I'm sure somebody can email me and tell me how many possibilities you have.
Somebody who's good at math, right? Yeah.
Yeah, it's going to be quite incredible. That's very technical, and I don't work that way to begin with. I like to work from the inside out, just like you were talking about, he's a biker, and he's got an attitude.
Right.
Well, but after I do that, I can go and look at the form of it, and that's the elements, rather than the content being the thinking and feeling of the character. And I can tweak and manage. I can go, that's real close to another character I have. How about I make the biker with a clear tone and low with an accent? So I can manage what I've done and make sure there's separation between my characters. So the form, which is what we've talking about, the colors, and the content, the acting, the agenda of the character, these become free-floating, and allowed me it also not only allows me to tap into characters I've already created and keep them separate, but it also allows me to create new characters.
Right.
For example, did Krang. Believe me, I didn't have a chortling, burbling blob of a character that was villainous but funny in my little repertory company. I had to make it up on the spot. And I was able to do that by taking the various parts of the description that were given to me by Fred Wolf, the producer, and marry them to the different elements of the voice.
Do you happen to remember what those descriptions were that were given to you when you created that character?
Vaguely. I mean, I was handed a script and given 2 minutes. I actually was replacing someone that didn't work out on the role. And it said Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And I thought, well, this will never go anywhere. And then it said Krang, an evil, burbling blob of a character, evil but funny. And so I thought, well, I've got 2 minutes. Maybe I'll just marry him to the 6 elements of a character voice and just pray I come out with something. So I thought, okay, evil, okay, pitch. I'll give him a high pitch range so he can be low or he can be very high. And then the pitch characteristic, which describes the pitch. I'll give him kind of a cottony pitch characteristic, and so he's going high-low. Tempo, vary that so he can be very slow or very fast if he wants to. And then going to rhythm, I'll give him kind of a undulating rhythm like Katharine Hepburn because he's a bob. And then placement, I'll make it back in my throat, and so it's kind of cottony sounding. Then mouth work, always got to be icky. So, well, when I add that to it, then I realized it said, but funny. Oh, I know. Underneath all of that, I'll make him a long-suffering Jewish mother. So I get up in front of the microphone and I go, so this is what I get for surrounding myself with how would you like to be sauteed in cilantro and a touch of oil?
That is absolutely fascinating the way that you put that together, and that's going to be so instructive for people who are listening to the program.
And I want to ask you, just in that vein, you also did the voice match for Buzz Lightyear for the Toy Story video games and also for Disneyland and Disney World. How do the principles that you're talking about there apply to the work that you do in voice matching?
Well, the principles apply this way. Oh, first of all, let me just say that what I just demonstrated is when you really don't have a clue and you have to rely on your technique. I really was at a loss. Well, how do I do a character like this? I've never done it before, so I had somewhere to go. But going to your question on voice match is about 80% genetic. You come in because you have a voice that's fairly close.
Right.
And that means that you need to know your voice. And in fact, I just taught this last weekend with casting Queen Barbara Harris. And what happens is you've got 20% left over to get you closer. So in the case of Tim Allen, we sounded kind of the same. It turns out that all middle-aged men that went to prison and did drugs roughly sound the same. So I've got that going. Now I listen to, and because I know how to break down the elements of a character voice, I can be very specific. And I noticed that, first of all, that Tim Allen is more forward in his mask, whereas I speak in the back. He's more forward, if you can tell the difference.
I can.
Then also, his rhythm, that was another thing that was different than mine. He was kind of going, and also trying to think of how he thinks. I protect the universe from the evil Emperor Zurg. He's kind of doing John Wayne.
A little bit, yeah.
I suspect that because Tim needed to do a hero, that he would dip into John Wayne every so often. So then I also heard that in his pitch, Woody, I don't know if this is right. He'd scrape. In other words, he'd go to the lowest part of his range. So by hearing those things, I get myself from 80% to 90%, and it can't go any farther. In fact, I did 9 years of Buzz before they got somebody else in. Yeah, it was Michael Eisner said it was never a marriage made in heaven, but I had a 9-year ride doing it, and so it was. It became valuable for me to teach that and to also listen to other people because I made so much money. I made about $900,000, I think, in that 9-year period doing toys and CDs and all sorts of stuff.
Wow.
And so I thought, whoa, I became like the crocodile looking for Captain Hook's other hand. Who do I sound like? And so then listening to Ian McShane and how he goes about what he does and how I changed my accent slightly to British, but actually it's a British, he's trying to sound like an American but makes mistakes every so often. So being able to separate out things helps me get more specific and helps all actors get more specific. And it starts with going, how do I sound? And then asking people, who do you know that sounds like me?
You're really one of the most respected people in the business. I would say roughly 50% of everybody who's been on this show has mentioned you and has spoken so highly of you, and that was one of the main reasons why I decided that we definitely had to get you on the program. You're known as one of the best teachers in the business, and I can certainly see why from our discussion here. You work with Nancy Cartwright, who does Bart Simpson. You are her personal coach. You also are friends with Ed Asner, and you've worked with him. And I wonder, since he did the animated feature Up, did you work with him on Up at all?
No, not at all. In fact, Ed's been my mentor for he was my absolute across-the-street neighbor when I first met him about 25 years ago. And I've worked with him and hired him to do audiobooks with me and did a play with him. And I just tried to get any opportunity to be around him because he's such an interesting actor, such a good actor and so articulate. And I didn't work with him or really talk about it too much. Ed's approach to doing animation or anything for that matter, and certainly comedy, is to play the reality and trust that the lines, the scene, make it funny. And that's one of the things that I learned from him, is that you don't have to try to make things funny. Play the reality and trust that the way it's presented will make it comedic. It's one of the aspects that I'll be teaching with actor-comedian Brad Garrett on October 2nd. We're teaching an event in Santa Monica called Crafting Comedy Under the Stars. And we really are, for the last year, Brad and I have been chewing on this concept that you hear you can't teach comedy. And we said, well, nonsense. Of course you can. There's some things that are a little uphill, but most of the things you can teach about comedy have to do with approach and acting. And so, no, I didn't work with Ed, but he did a wonderful job. And I think why, when you listen to it, is that if you didn't see the animation, you wouldn't think that it was a cartoon.
That's true. The vocal performance is played very straight.
It is, and he trusted Pixar to visualize what he had, and that gave it an anchor into reality. And I think that's one of the great things about Ed Asner is that he to himself, he said, I'm no comedian, and he's not a funny guy. He tries once in a while.
Well, he was very funny on the Mary Tyler Moore Show, certainly. That's where most people got to know him as a household name.
Right. Well, the writing was phenomenal.
Yeah.
And that's what he points to, the writing. And yes, he agrees with me that there's a switch you turn in your head saying, okay, it is comedy. But you don't play the comedy, you play the reality of the scene. When his famous line of, I hate spunk. You know that line?
You're spunky, he says to Mary, and then he goes, yeah, I hate spunk.
That's right. Well, he's playing the real hating it rather than trusting that when he commits to that, it's funny because of the line.
You mentioned your course that you're teaching with Brad Garrett on the 2nd. And you do teach all over the country. You can check out, as I said, we'll provide a link for this, but check out dates at patfraley.com. You are also offering a one-day event in Seattle on October 9th called Everything They Expect You to Know But Nobody Teaches You. I think I'm paraphrasing that right.
That's pretty darn close.
What can people expect to learn? I'm not, again, asking you to give away too much, but what are some of the fundamentals that people who attend are going to be taught? What are the things that they don't teach you, I guess is my question.
Yeah. Well, Stephan, here's how it goes. I hired the best people at the top of the industry for the last 2 years to learn what they want versus what the agent thinks they want or the demo producer, so I could get right there because I suspected, as many talents, that there's a filtering problem. I create a demo based on a demo producer, and then I know the buyers. I've been in the business 34 years, and they go, that's not what I want. I want something 30 seconds long, not 2 minutes or a minute, and I don't want very much production at all. And it was eye-opening. So I listened to these people, and I did a survey in the Midwest of key commercial buyers. And the survey, actually, I didn't do a survey. I went to a person who had done an extensive survey. And they informed me that the average time spent listening to a commercial audition is 7 seconds. And within that time, they decide whether you go in the callback bin or get the job or you don't.
That is dauntingly short.
Yeah.
It really is.
Absolutely. And so what I found is that in many cases, it's important to have your name slate at the beginning of your demo. Well, by listening to these people at the top and thinking about how they think, I realized I created and collected various slate techniques. For example, and these are all the way from very, very smart to just downright shameless. For example, a simple one is when you slate while you're in perform in your best personal style. So if my personal style is warm and kind of funny, Pat Fraley, announcer. So they listen and they go, I think I know what this guy will sound like. And before I open my mouth and get 3 or 4 words out, they're thinking, yeah, I knew it. Because it's all about them, Stephan. It's about them going, I think I know this, yes, I do. So that's a way of knowing that from the first time you say Stephan to Cox, by the time you say that, they should know who you are and what's coming. Now, that's one thing. Now, say you're doing a character. Yes, say it's a grumpy guy. As the grumpy guy. So rather than, if I'm going to do it in character, rather than go, Pat Fraley is grumpy guy, I play the action to make another person feel bad as that character as I do my slate. Like, Pat Fraley is the grumpy guy. See, otherwise you give them a hollow shell. You talk about, I've mentioned the 6 elements of a character voice being the form. You're giving them the form but no content. So if you're going to slate in character, slate it in act right from the beginning. And there's another one called the slide, because you think, well, you don't go to a party and knock on the door with the lampshade on your head. You get in there before you do that. So how about I give him my own voice and slide into the character before I begin? So it goes, Pat Fraley is the grumpy guy. Then you get the best of both worlds.
That is really fascinating, and I think that's something that a lot of people who have been in this business for a number of years, myself included, don't really give much thought to. The slate is something that is so pro forma. When you're in the middle of an audition, you're much more focused, really, on what you're going to do with the copy as opposed to the slate itself. But as you say, since you only get such a limited time, and I know this to be true, what you say, because we've interviewed people on the commercial side of things, and you can, to a certain degree, while you're really trying to impress these people and try to get their attention, you can kind of feel for them in their position a little bit. They're faced with listening to in upwards of 100 people basically reading the same words over and over again. I would imagine that having somebody who slates in a way that stands out would very much work in your favor.
Absolutely. And Stephan, you're so right to think about how your efforts are being listened to. Some gal named Tammy, who's an assistant, trying to eat her lunch. She has a half a tuna sandwich in her mouth, and she has to take these MP3s from one file over to the callback file if she likes them, and she has to get it done in half an hour. Then someone else will listen to them, but they're going to have an assistant, if they have one, cull through their 100 auditions or whatever, or 200 or whatever it is. But just to finish up, because I'd like to give a breadth of this, as long as we're chewing on this slates and you find it of interest. Here's a couple other ones. Tessa Bourgeois, who's a wonderful actor, Renee's daughter, and I were working this morning, and she said, here's what I always do. I record the slate after I've finished my audition.
So she tail slates, I believe that's called.
Right, because then she's into the character, she knows how it feels, and then she can sound exactly like her performance and play the acting underneath. Very good idea. Following along that, another slating trick is if you're playing the big bully. This is from Robert Altman, the director, when you audition. He said, on the slate, what you do, or when you come in the room, in his case, I'm on camera, you come in with the attitude of being exactly the opposite. So if I'm going to play a big bully, I'm going to do it a little hesitant and a little light. So I go, Pat Fraley as the big bully. The other day I was telling this guy. That way you get maximum impact.
And they also see your range.
Yeah, well, they do see your range if you want them to see the range. Now, if they said we want a real Southern guy that's 70 years old, of course, that wouldn't be the one I'd do. But, there are no rules, only notions. And to have and what I'll teach in Seattle is all these things that no one will ever teach you, even the incredible buyers and people at the top. They don't know that. These are our tricks. But to have a volley of them is of such value, because when do I use one or the other? Depends on how I feel that morning. I'll give you 2 more because they're the dirtiest. These are the down and dirty ones.
All right, good. I can't wait.
Okay. One thing is, if you're recording from home and say you're sending something direct to a producer or somebody that you don't know of and you want to have credibility, the next time you're in a proper studio, have them record the engineer pushing the talkback button. Have them record it as it comes through to the booth. And rolling on one, Stephan, because you know how tacky that sound is, how distinct it is. You can never create it, right? Get that recording, and then when you're at home in your pajamas and you're recording in your closet, put that at the top of your audition. And rolling on one, Stephan, and leave it on there. So instant credibility, always in the proper studio. Now here's the dirtiest one I know. This is great. Say you're supposed to be Commander Arkoff. Okay, so what you do is you're at home, you record it, you do 3 or 4 takes, you get it just perfect, and then you record the slate. And here's what you do: I hope you can hear this. So here's my slate. After it's perfectly done, I record the slate that goes like this. Pat Fraley as Commander Arkoff.
So it sounds like you're really just riffing this off the top of your head. That's brilliant.
No audition, seamless. The guy's an incredible cold reader. I mean, personally, I have a reading disorder. I've always had it. I can't do 2 sentences without, making a mistake. So it gives the sense of, wow, this guy must be really killer.
Well, it sounds like there's a ton of stuff to learn, not only with the seminar that you're doing, but also, as I've mentioned, you've published a ton of books and CDs on pretty much every aspect of voiceover that I can tell. So let's say you're somebody who's just dipping his or her toe into the water in terms of voiceover. There some people have told them, hey, you've got a great voice. Which of your particular volumes would you recommend looking into if you were just getting started?
Well, we'll talk about what I offer, but then I'll open it up to what I think they should do in that case. But first, I have a modest book, which is about 160 pages, called The 9 Critical Skills to Voiceover Excellence. And it's really about what we're all up against, regardless of whether they're intermediate or beginning. That will let them know what aspects that they need to know. For example, reading, improv, acting, character and accents. Those are some of the 9 that they'll need to address. And I always think it's not the most thorough voiceover book, but it is the most practical because 90 pages out of the 160 are exercises to advance their interests. But just to continue on that, Stefan, as far as what does a person that said, oh, you have a good voice, or they have an interest,
sure.
I think that's what's really fundamental is acting, to take acting. And I would suggest they don't take acting in the arena of voiceover, that they go to really the best acting teacher in their area and study acting. Why? Because I think it'll be less money, and then after they get some acting training, they can apply that in workshops that are voiceover workshops. And I think that would be a more economically feasible and more productive. But acting and storytelling are fundamental, and guess what? Storytelling is acting. And that would be the place to go. Another place is improv, and it's not so much to be clever. We think of improv as performance improv. No, long-form improv is very helpful in improvisation classes because you get a sense of the story being on your back. And it's all about realizing the stories. Even in a commercial, there's a miserable little story we have to realize. It not only does that, but it allows you to tap into your emotions while you're using words that are familiar to you. Then, after you get a sense of, oh, when I'm upset or I'm begging someone, this is the way Pat Fraley begs. So you get a sense of it because you're using your own words. Then when you get a script and it's a character that's a 200-pound Scottish duck, you're doing the duck, but you're still begging the way Pat Fraley begs. It's the way it's going to do. Actually, it sounded Russian there
for a second, but then once you got to the you pulled it around. I heard the Craig Ferguson coming through there.
That's right. That's when I realized I was, like 4,000 miles away.
As I said at the top of the interview, you have worked, and the reason why I said you've worked consistently in animation since 1979 is that is where your IMDb listing begins. But you say you started in 1974 in Australia, which is even more impressive. What's the key to your longevity that you've managed to stay so vital for so long in this business?
Well, first of all, I don't work nearly as much as I used to because I'm 61 years old. And so it's a natural thing where, how many grumpy grandpas or generals do they need in a story? There's one grumpy general and 35 guys that are going to go, and die, in an interactive game. By the way, the good news is that when you're a grumpy general, here's how you die. My hand's going numb. So you don't have to scream. But, it's a natural progression for all performers to get less roles as they get older. And yes, I can sound like I'm 40, but when you get younger than 40, can I think like a 30-year-old in 2010 or 25-year-old? I always say that when I do a teenager, if I could pull up, it would sound like a teenager with a mortgage. It's hard to fake green, and you're only green once. So that being said, my career, I have had two parallel careers. I always taught from the very beginning of my career, and I always performed. And somewhere in the last decade, they kind of, as far as focus and money and energy, they sort of passed. Now I teach more, but I do perform as well. But I don't perform every day. I do a couple gigs a week, and which is just fine. So, yeah, I've had a huge career, and I think the longevity, because it's still, viable, has to do with opening myself up to all sorts of stuff. For example, I never said I'm only going to do cartoons or I'm only going to do commercials. I said I want to be a performer and I'll do whatever, and that opened up me getting training in all areas.
Well, preparation is a huge part of it, as you say, and the willingness to do whatever it takes. If you're wanting to be a performer, then that's precisely what it is that you need to prepare to do in all aspects of it. But Pat Fraley,
Yeah.
I want to thank you so much for spending the time with us on the show today. This has been incredibly informative. And one more time, I will say anybody who's interested in checking out Pat Fraley, his classes, which he teaches both in Los Angeles and also all over the country. And also, if you're interested in any of his books or products, you can go to patfraley.com. Pat Fraley, again, thank you so much for joining us on that Voiceover podcast.
Hey, I want to leave you with one thing that Pamela Chalet, a colleague and a voiceover actress, says. She says, chase excellence, and the money will chase you. Sometimes.
I like that. Pat Fraley, thank you so much.
My pleasure. I'm grateful for the opportunity to have access to all my participants and students. And when you mentioned a couple times about I don't want you to give away too much, that's my job. I'm available till I go home. When I go home, I won't be. I'll be having an awfully good time up there.
That Voiceover Podcast is a co-production of Half Full and Get Creative, Inc. For more information, go to thatvoiceoverpodcast.com or check us out on iTunes. Thanks for listening. I'm Stephen Cox.